It all began with a DNA test, a harmless attempt to uncover family roots and reconnect with long-lost relatives. But the results revealed something no one was prepared for: secrets buried for decades, truths hidden behind closed doors, and a trail of lies that would expose a chilling crime. This wasn't just a family secret. It was a discovery that would unravel lives, raise impossible questions, and ultimately lead to a shocking revelation no one saw coming. Stay with us as we uncover how a simple test opened the door to a family's darkest chapter. The Harrisons were the picture of an ordinary family. George, a respected high school teacher, had spent decades inspiring students with his calm demeanor and love of history. His wife, Mary, was a nurse, known for her kindness and unwavering dedication to the community. Together, they had 3 children. Sarah, the eldest, a lawyer with a sharp mind and fierce loyalty to her family. Michael, a tech entrepreneur whose charm lit up every room he entered. And Emily, the youngest, a college student with dreams of becoming a journalist. The Harrisons lived in a modest home in Cedarville, a small town where everyone knew their neighbors and life moved at a gentle pace. It was the kind of place where doors were rarely locked and secrets rarely stayed hidden, or so people thought. But as idyllic as their lives appeared, the family carried a question that had lingered for decades. George's mother had always spoken of a sibling who went missing long before George was born, a brother who had disappeared without explanation. The family had dismissed the story as a tragic memory, lost to time, until Sarah proposed a way to get answers. A DNA test. Sarah's suggestion was simple. The test could reveal lost relatives and maybe, just maybe, offer closure to the family. They approached it with excitement, imagining long-lost cousins or distant connections that could enrich their understanding of their roots. It seemed like a harmless, even hopeful idea, but no one could have imagined what the results would uncover. When the results arrived weeks later, they revealed something that didn't make sense. Among the expected connections to cousins and distant relatives was one match that no one had anticipated. A name that wasn't familiar, linked by a close genetic tie. Sarah, ever the determined lawyer, began to investigate further. Who was this person? Why had no one in the family ever mentioned them? Sarah's search quickly hit a dead end. The name, tied to an unfamiliar address, raised more questions than it answered. And then, while reviewing old family photos and documents, she found something even more unsettling. A handwritten note in her grandmother's belongings, tucked away in an old photo album. It was dated 1973 and simply read, "He knows. Don't let him dig deeper." It wasn't signed. Confused and alarmed, Sarah shared the discovery with her siblings. What had started as an innocent curiosity about their ancestry was beginning to feel like something far more serious. Mary and George, though hesitant, acknowledged the possibility of secrets from the past. But they assured their children it was likely nothing more than a misunderstanding. Determined to find answers, Sarah contacted the mysterious DNA match. But days turned into weeks with no reply. When she finally received an email, it contained only a single line. "You don't want to know?" It was too late. Sarah's curiosity had already ignited, and she wasn't going to stop now. But what the DNA results revealed wasn't just a family secret. It pointed directly to a chilling crime that would change the Harrisons' lives forever. The DNA results arrived with a mix of excitement and anticipation. Each family member eagerly scanned through their reports, curious about the origins and matches that might link them to a larger story. At first glance, everything seemed ordinary. Traces of European ancestry, connections to distant relatives, and matches that aligned with the family's known history. But then Sarah spotted something unusual. Among the expected connections, a name appeared that didn't belong. The match indicated a close genetic relationship, closer than a distant cousin, but the name was completely unfamiliar: Daniel Price. No one in the Harrison family had ever heard of him. Sarah's confusion quickly turned into suspicion. She called her parents, asking if they recognized the name. George and Mary exchanged a quick glance before shaking their heads. "It must be a mistake," George said with a nervous chuckle. But his expression betrayed something else, an unease that Sarah couldn't ignore. Determined to find clarity, Sarah dug deeper into the results. She compared family tree diagrams, checked birth records, and even looked into old family photos for clues. But no matter where she turned, Daniel Price's name remained a mystery. It didn't make sense. If he was as closely related as the DNA suggested, why had no one in the family ever heard of him? Sarah wasn't the only one who noticed something was off. Emily, the youngest of the siblings, quietly observed their father's reaction whenever the topic came up. He grew distant, avoiding eye contact, and deflected questions with vague answers. For a man who had always been calm and collected, his uneasiness was impossible to miss. Meanwhile, Sarah decided to take a different approach. She reached out to Daniel Price directly. Her message was simple: "Hi, I'm Sarah Harrison. We matched on a DNA test, and I'd love to learn more about our connection." She waited anxiously for a response, refreshing her inbox every few minutes. Hours turned into days, and there was no reply. But just as she was about to give up, a single email appeared in her inbox. The email was short, almost cryptic. Daniel wrote, "We're connected, but I can't say more. Be careful who you ask." Sarah's curiosity deepened. Why would someone so closely related be unwilling to talk? And what was he warning her about? As Sarah shared the message with her siblings, the family began to question everything they thought they knew. Emily recalled strange stories her grandmother used to tell about their father's childhood, stories that didn't seem to line up with what George had told them. Michael, ever the skeptic, suggested the match could be an error in the DNA database. But Sarah was convinced this was no mistake. With the family's blessing, Sarah contacted a genealogist for help. The expert combed through records, piecing together fragments of information that hinted at a connection between George and Daniel. But one document stood out: a birth certificate from 1961, listing a child born in Cedarville under the name Daniel Price. The father's name was blank, and the mother's name was someone none of the Harrisons recognized. Sarah's mind raced. Who was this woman? And why did her father's DNA connect so closely to a man she had never heard of? Every answer seemed to lead to more questions, and one unsettling truth became clear. Whatever secrets the family was uncovering, someone had worked very hard to keep them buried. But this was just the beginning. What Sarah and her siblings were about to uncover would shift their focus from family history to something far darker. Something no DNA test could have prepared them for. Sarah knew she couldn't piece this puzzle together alone. After weeks of research, unanswered emails, and countless dead ends, she made the decision to involve the authorities. The local police agreed to take a closer look, especially after she shared the DNA results, the mysterious warning from Daniel Price, and the birth certificate that didn't align with anything the family knew about their history. The investigation began with interviews. Detectives first turned to George, the family patriarch. Sitting in the familiar comfort of his living room, George maintained his calm demeanor, brushing off the DNA match as an error or a scam. "I don't know this Daniel Price," he insisted, his voice steady. But his body language told a different story. His hands clenched tightly around the armrests of his chair, and he avoided direct eye contact whenever Daniel's name came up. Next, the detectives reached out to other family members. Sarah's mother, Mary, appeared genuinely confused. She recounted stories George had shared about his childhood, but none of them hinted at anything unusual. "We've been married for over 30 years, she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I thought I knew everything about him." But as detectives continued their questioning, inconsistencies began to emerge. Detectives began piecing together a timeline based on the information they had gathered. George had grown up in Cedarville, just like his parents before him. But a 10-year gap in the family's history stood out. From 1960 to 1970, there were no school records, no photographs, and no concrete evidence of where George or his family had lived. When asked about this period, George offered vague responses, claiming his family moved frequently during those years. But something about his answers felt incomplete. As the investigation unfolded, a significant clue emerged. While searching through the attic of the Harrison family home, Emily stumbled upon an old wooden chest tucked behind a stack of boxes. Inside, she found a collection of dusty letters, faded photographs, and a worn leather journal. The journal, written in careful but shaky handwriting, belonged to George's late mother. The journal entries began innocently enough. Notes about family dinners, holiday plans, and everyday musings. But as Emily flipped further into the pages, the tone shifted. One entry, dated March 14th, 1962, caught her eye. It read, "He came back again last night. I told him to leave, but he said he wouldn't go without answers. George must never find out." The entry didn't explain who he was, but it was clear that this person's presence had terrified George's mother. Emily immediately handed the journal over to the police, who began cross-referencing the entries with other records. A deeper search into Cedarville's archives revealed that during the years George's family was supposedly moving around, there were multiple police reports filed under his mother's name. These reports mentioned disturbances at their home, loud arguments, an unidentified man showing up at odd hours, and neighbors reporting strange behavior. The discovery of these reports shifted the focus of the investigation. Who was this man, and what did he want from George's family? Detectives dug into property records, tracing the ownership of George's childhood home. To their surprise, they found that the house had been sold abruptly in 1963, shortly after the disturbances were reported. The new owner was listed as Daniel Price's mother, a woman who had no known ties to the Harrisons, at least none that anyone could explain. As police questioned surviving neighbors from the Cedarville community, they uncovered even more startling information. Several neighbors recalled seeing a young boy, roughly George's age, playing in the yard during the early 1960s. But this boy wasn't George. According to the neighbors, the child didn't speak much, often appearing withdrawn and scared. One elderly neighbor described a chilling memory. He always looked over his shoulder, like he was waiting for something bad to happen. Detectives pressed George for answers, but his responses remained vague. Meanwhile, Sarah, Emily, and Michael pored over the journal, searching for more clues. One entry, dated April 10th, 1963, seemed particularly ominous. "The guilt is too much. If anyone finds out the truth, it will destroy him. I had no choice." These words raised more questions than answers, leaving the family to wonder, what guilt was she referring to? And what truth had she been so desperate to protect? The investigation was at a standstill. George's refusal to cooperate, the cryptic journal entries, and the mysterious connection to Daniel Price painted a disturbing picture, but the final piece of the puzzle remained just out of reach. That is, until one final clue emerged, an old photograph hidden in the back of the journal. The photo showed two young boys, arms around each other, standing in front of a small house. One boy was unmistakably George. The other, though slightly older, bore an eerie resemblance to Daniel Price. It was now undeniable. George and Daniel were connected by more than DNA. But the question remained, what had happened all those years ago that forced their lives apart? And why had George's family gone to such great lengths to hide it? The photograph of George and Daniel brought a new sense of urgency to the investigation. It was no longer a question of whether George knew Daniel. It was clear they had shared a past. Detectives began pressing harder, revisiting the old journal entries and archived police records, searching for any detail that could explain the connection. As they pieced together fragments of information, the story that emerged was far darker than anyone had imagined. Detectives discovered that in 1963, Daniel's mother, the woman listed on the birth certificate, had filed a missing persons report for her son. The report, however, was abruptly withdrawn just 2 weeks later, with no explanation. When they tracked down surviving relatives of Daniel's mother, one family member hesitantly revealed a shocking claim. Daniel had been living with George's family during the time of his disappearance. But why would Daniel, a boy from another family, have been staying with the Harrisons? And what happened that led to his mother withdrawing the report? The answers lay buried in a series of journal entries from George's mother. As detectives re-examined the entries, one particular passage stood out. It read, "He knows too much. I tried to reason with him, but he threatened to go to the police. I can't let him destroy everything we've worked for." The chilling words painted a picture of desperation. Detectives speculated that Daniel may have uncovered a secret within the Harrison family, something so damaging that George's mother was willing to go to extreme lengths to protect it. But what could that secret have been? As investigators searched for answers, they turned their attention to the backyard of George's childhood home. A neighbor, now in her 70s, recalled a memory she had never shared with anyone. One night in 1963, she had seen George's mother in the backyard, shoveling dirt under the cover of darkness. The next morning, she noticed a patch of freshly turned soil where there had once been a flower bed. Armed with this information, detectives obtained a warrant to search the property. After hours of careful excavation, they uncovered a small wooden box buried beneath the old flower bed. Inside were several items: a pair of children's shoes, a rusted pocket watch, and a bundle of letters wrapped in plastic. The letters, written in a child's handwriting, were signed by Daniel. One letter stood out. It simply read, "Please don't hurt me. I won't tell anyone." The discovery confirmed what investigators had feared. Daniel had been living with the Harrisons, but his stay had not been voluntary. The letters hinted at coercion, fear, and a growing tension between the boy and George's mother. But there was still one question left unanswered. What had happened to Daniel? Detectives turned their focus back to George, whose demeanor had grown increasingly defensive. When confronted with the evidence, George broke his silence for the first time. In a trembling voice, he confessed that Daniel was, in fact, his half-brother, a child his father had conceived during an affair. George admitted that his mother had brought Daniel into their home after his father's death, claiming it was her duty to care for him. But their relationship quickly soured. According to George, his mother became increasingly paranoid, convinced that Daniel's presence threatened the stability of their family. She believed he would expose her late husband's infidelity to the community, tarnishing their family's reputation. As tensions escalated, Daniel attempted to run away, but his mother caught him before he could leave. What happened next remained unclear, until George shared one final, shocking detail. Through tears, George admitted that one night, he overheard a violent argument between his mother and Daniel. The shouting stopped suddenly, and when George went to check, he found his mother sitting silently in the kitchen, her hands covered in dirt. She told him Daniel had left, but George always suspected otherwise. With this confession, detectives returned to the Harrison property for a more thorough search. What they found beneath the flower bed was devastating. A set of human remains, later confirmed through DNA testing to be Daniel Price. The boy who had been listed as missing for decades had never left the property. His life had ended in the place he was supposed to find safety. The truth was finally out. Daniel's death had been a tragic attempt to silence a family secret, a secret that, ironically, the DNA test had brought to light. But just when the investigators thought they had the full story, one final discovery turned the case upside down. The remains of Daniel Price had been buried for decades, hidden under layers of soil and secrets. The DNA test that Sarah had taken, which began as an innocent attempt to trace her ancestry, had now exposed a truth that left the family and investigators reeling. But as the pieces of the story fell into place, one final twist emerged, a revelation that changed everything. Through additional investigation and forensic analysis, detectives reconstructed the timeline of Daniel's short life with the Harrison family. The record showed that Daniel had been brought into the home in late 1962, following the death of George's father. George's mother, Helen, insisted it was an act of kindness, a way to honor her late husband's legacy. But the letters and journal entries told a different story. Helen had resented Daniel from the start, seeing him not as a child in need, but as a living reminder of her husband's betrayal. As tensions in the household grew, Daniel began to fear for his safety. His letters, recovered from the buried box, revealed a child desperate for freedom. In one letter he wrote, "I don't think she likes me. I want to leave, but she won't let me." The entries in Helen's journal mirrored his growing anxiety. She wrote of her frustration with Daniel, calling him a threat to the family's future. But the journal also revealed her intent. "If he talks, we lose everything. I won't let that happen." On the night of Daniel's death, neighbors reported hearing raised voices coming from the Harrison home. One neighbor described a sound they would never forget, a sharp cry, followed by complete silence. George, who was just a teenager at the time, later admitted he had heard the same sounds from his room, but was too afraid to intervene. The next morning, Helen told George that Daniel had run away and instructed him to stay quiet about the incident. For years, the family lived with the unspoken weight of what had happened. George claimed he had always suspected the truth, but chose to believe his mother's version of events to avoid facing the reality. It was only through the DNA test, decades later, that Daniel's name resurfaced and forced the family to confront the past. The DNA match between Sarah and Daniel's distant relatives had sparked the investigation that finally uncovered the truth. When the truth came out, the emotional toll on the Harrison family was devastating. Mary, George's wife, was horrified to learn the extent of the secrets her husband had kept from her. Sarah, Emily, and Michael struggled with anger and grief, torn between their love for their father and the shocking revelation of his complicity in hiding the crime. George himself broke down during questioning, admitting he had lived his entire life in shame and regret. "I was a coward," he told investigators. "I should have done something, but I didn't." Legally, the case presented challenges. Helen, the primary suspect, had passed away years earlier, leaving no one to face trial for Daniel's death. However, George was charged with obstruction of justice for his role in concealing the crime and withholding information from authorities. In court, he pled guilty, offering no defense other than his own deep remorse. The judge, acknowledging the unique circumstances of the case, handed down a reduced sentence but emphasized the gravity of George's actions, or inactions. The revelation of Daniel's death shook the community of Cedarville. Neighbors who had known the Harrisons for decades expressed disbelief, struggling to reconcile the kind and gentle image of Helen with the dark truth of her actions. Local media covered the story extensively, framing it as a tragic tale of family secrets and missed opportunities for justice. The discovery also sparked conversations about the lasting impact of trauma and the importance of speaking out, even when it's difficult. For the Harrison siblings, the truth, brought a complicated sense of closure. While they now understood what had happened to Daniel, the knowledge came with an overwhelming sense of loss. Loss for a life cut short, for the trust they had placed in their father, and for the family they thought they knew. In an interview years later, Sarah reflected on the experience. "I think about Daniel every day," she said. "I wonder who he could have been, what he could have done, if only someone had stood up for him. Could this tragedy have been prevented? What if someone had spoken up sooner? What if George had found the courage to confront his mother all those years ago?" The answers may never be known, but the story of Daniel Price serves as a reminder of the importance of truth and accountability. What would you do if you uncovered a secret like this within your own family? Would you have the strength to face it? The Harrison story is a haunting tale of love, fear, and the devastating consequences of silence. It's a reminder that the past has a way of coming to light, no matter how deeply it's buried. Remember that innocent DNA test? What started as a simple search for family roots didn't just connect Sarah to her ancestry. It uncovered a chilling story of betrayal, silence, and loss. A test meant to celebrate family ties instead revealed the dark truth of a hidden life, a buried secret, and the tragic end of a boy who had been silenced for decades. The journey began with hope, but ended with heartbreak. For the Harrison family, the DNA test was a catalyst, tearing through carefully constructed stories and unearthing a truth no one wanted to face. Daniel Price wasn't just a forgotten relative. He was a child whose life ended before it had truly begun, a victim whose story was hidden beneath layers of shame and fear. The evidence spoke louder than any words ever could. The journal entries, the letters, the buried remains, all pointed to a crime that had been buried as deeply as the truth. What the DNA test revealed wasn't just a family connection. It linked the present to a past that could no longer be ignored. The match wasn't a coincidence. It was a reminder that justice, though delayed, cannot be silenced forever. The case left scars on everyone it touched. George's confession, while incomplete, shed light on the events, but also raised new questions about what he knew and when he knew it. His decision to stay silent for so many years may never be fully understood, but his eventual admission helped bring Daniel's story into the light. And though the courtroom could not hold Helen accountable, her actions will forever be remembered as a warning of how deeply secrets can destroy lives. Daniel Price's life was cut short, but his story will not be forgotten. What started as a DNA match uncovered a boy's cry for help, one that had been ignored for far too long. It serves as a haunting reminder that the past, no matter how well hidden, always has a way of resurfacing. And when it does, the consequences ripple far beyond what anyone could imagine. A single test promised to bring answers, but instead, it uncovered a killer, one who thought their secrets were buried forever. The Harrison family story is a stark lesson about the lengths people will go to protect the truth and the costs of silence. How much do you really know about your family? And what would you do if a simple test turned your world upside down? Daniel Price's story leaves us with many questions and difficult emotions. What would you have done if you were in Sarah's place? Could you confront the possibility of uncovering such a devastating truth? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear how you would have handled this situation. If this story gripped you, there's so much more to come. Don't forget to like this video, share it with others who love true crime, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another case that reveals the truth behind the headlines. And make sure you're here next week as we uncover the unsolved case of a mysterious disappearance in a haunted town, where every clue seems to lead to more questions than answers. You won't want to miss it.